Hey folks, this is Best in Slot, and today we're going to take a look at a brand new set image from Jurassic World Dominion. This was posted out by Colin Treverrow just a little bit earlier today, and already some people have started to break it down, and that's exactly what we're going to do in this video. Before we properly dive into it, I do want to give credit to Adventure Collectibles. They were one of the first I saw who really tore this image apart, and they found a lot of the things we're going to talk about tonight. And it was kind of the jump off point for the several theories I have about what's going on here. So we'll get to those in a little bit, but big shout out to those. I will link their Twitter down below. So the first thing to establish is both when and where this is taking place, and I think we can get a pretty good idea for both. So the first thing we can note is that this is likely taking place a couple of decades ago, 3 decades ago, maybe the early 1990s? I don't know, maybe. There's a few reasons to believe that. The first is that there is an analog telephone on the wall. I know some people, hipstery people, still use them, or older people, but generally speaking, it's a modern looking science lab. It probably doesn't have an analog telephone. The second is simply the presence of InGen itself. InGen itself doesn't really exist in a conventional sense anymore. Of course, Masrani's kind of moved in since Jurassic World. And finally, over here on the bottom right, we have what looks to be a Polaroid camera. And again, hipsters love their Polaroid cameras, but generally speaking, it's not the most common thing. And again, I wouldn't expect to find one in a scientific lab like this. I'm sure there's a few more things out there if you look into the scientific equipment. Over here, for example, I don't know what this is. It kind of looks like a blender. It looks like that's a whisk and that's the ball right there, but it might be a telescope, a microscope of some description, I should say. And it's using a exposed bulb as the light source. I'd expect something a little bit more modern in a modern lab. You don't really ever know, but generally speaking, between these three and the general vibe you get, I think we can safely say this is not a modern shot. So right away we know this is likely a flashback. And if we take that and we apply it to when, or where I should say, it's taking place, well, that becomes a little more clear. So you're not going to gain too much from this image right now. I just want you to keep in mind these three images right here. What they look like and what we're dealing with here. So we've got on the wall these sort of indentations, these circles. There's one there, there's one there, there's actually one creeping around up there at the top. We've got what looks to be like a fossil display indented into the wall over there. And on the floor, we have a two-tone floor with a red stripe going down the middle. So that tells us pretty convincingly, in my opinion, and again, shout out to Adv Collectibles on Twitter for this information initially. I think that fairly reliably places us in the genetics lab of the Jurassic Park Visitor Center. Alan and Ian and Ellie, they all turn up and they look at the raptor eggs and stuff like that, and they meet Dr. Wu for the first time. And you can see all over the walls, here, like many of the walls have these very similar circular holes drilled into them. So that's the first clue. The second is if we move on to the display over here. Now this is not identical, it's not indented in the wall in the same way. The shape here is different than the shape here. But it's very possible they had other fossil indentations elsewhere in the lab that we didn't see, and it's a similar style. The rock in the background is very similar, it's just more the fossil itself that doesn't look quite the same. But the most convincing, I will say, is definitely the next one, and that's this one right here. It kind of looks like I've given Alan Grant a long rectangular red penis, but we'll move on from that. But if you compare this, and this is from the new image from Dominion, to the floor here, the similarity is staggering. Not only do we have the two-tone pattern, and it's the same colour, it's like a lighter sort of greyish colour, and then there's a little bit more green and a darker colour next to it, and then there's the red stripes right down the middle. So I think for me that it alone would be enough to say yes, this is taking place in the genetics lab. Given the time scale and given how sort of neat and fancy the image is as well, it seems unlikely that this is modern day in any form. I suspect they haven't rejuvenated the original Jurassic Park genetics lab. So that really tells us that this is, in all likelihood, a flashback. At some point in Jurassic World Dominion, we're going to flash back to the genetics lab in the original Jurassic Park. No idea why, but we'll speculate about that in a minute. So let's take a look at the crate itself, because really the exciting thing, the possibilities here are what is inside the crate. So it's worth mentioning, first of all, it comes from InGen. Actually, that's important. 1993. But really I want to mention two different aspects. The first is the temperature. It says caution severe cold, and it also says caution liquid nitrogen, gloves and face shields are required. So whatever this is Let's assume it's dinosaur related, or at least genetics related. Given we're in a genetics lab, it is probably an embryo and not an egg. If you freeze an egg, the liquid inside expands and the legs can easily break. It does say it's fragile down here at the bottom, but the embryos are stored in, glass tubing. It could definitely be the embryos as well. And you can freeze embryos. I did go and check this and make sure they had a good, stable shelf life. So I did a little research, and I'll just read this out. This is from a human embryonic project. The embryos are put in a special solution containing substances, cryoprotectants, which help to draw water out from the embryo. So again, that's the problem. The water expands and it becomes sharp, and it basically pierces the embryos and provide protection in the cells. This protects them from damage caused by ice crystals forming. They're then frozen, either by cooling them slowly or fast freezing vitrification. Worth bearing in mind, vitrification would not have been a thing in 1993. It's a more modern process where they use much more cytoprotectants, about 4 times as many, but the cooling process is about 10,000 times quicker. Typical freezing in this manner takes about 2 hours. Anyways, it's then stored in tanks of liquid nitrogen, until you're ready to use them. So if we go back onto this image, as we can see, liquid nitrogen. Given it's going to the genetics lab, given we know there are embryos stored in genetics lab, it seems likely that this is in fact an embryo of some description, or a huge collection of embryos of some description. One of the other interesting things about this, though, is that it comes from Site B, Isla Sorna. Jurassic Outpost actually tweeted this image and said something along the lines of this hinting at return to Site B. I don't really think it does. This is clearly the Isla Nublar genetics lab, and it's arrived from Site B. This was in Site B, this crate, and then it's been brought over to Isla Nublar. But that alone is interesting. So, for those who don't know, we'll just reaffirm. Site B was basically, before, they let all the dinosaurs out because of the storm and everything, before it became its own ecosystem, before it got overrun. Site B was basically a nursery for dinosaurs, and typically they didn't ship embryos over, they'd ship eggs over or baby dinosaurs, and they had hatcheries, and they looked after the dinosaurs on Site B until they were ready to be displayed in the park over on Site A, i.e. Isla Nublar. So I think it's inherently a little odd that embryos were shifted from Site B to Site A. I can't really think of why that would be the case. Well, we're going to speculate as to why in a moment, but that is inherently a little bit strange. Now, we know there were embryos on Site A, on Isla Nublar, because we had the whole thing with Dennis Nedry taking the embryos in the Barbasol can. We'll get to that in a little bit as well. I have 3 main theories then as to what this could relate to. Let's just live in a world where these are embryos of some description. So, let's talk about the Dennis Nedry one. Dennis Nedry, I'm going to draw Dennis Nedry. Sorry, Nedry. There he is. There's Dennis Nedry. And Dennis Nedry takes the Barbasol can. And, the Barbasol can has not really been mentioned since. Jurassic Park the game had a whole storyline around it, but in the film canon it's been ignored. It is worth mentioning, though, that those embryos in the Barbasol can would be dead. I don't think the Barbasol is going to be that relevant, because these embryos are long gone. They are the exbryos is what they are. However, we know that Lewis Dodgson is returning in Jurassic World Dominion, and Dodgson is, of course, he was working for Biosyn. Now, Biosyn, again, doesn't really get many mentions in the Jurassic Park films, but they're huge in the books, and Dodgson is much bigger in the books than he is in the films. And his return means Biosyn is likely coming into the fold in some description. So, what could this flashback mean in relation to that? We know Dennis Nedry didn't make it off the island, but maybe, for example, and I'm open to many possibilities here, maybe Dodgson had another man on the inside. Maybe it wasn't just Dennis Nedry, maybe somebody else was here trying to smuggle embryos, trying to work with Nedry or something like that that we didn't get access to. There's no point doing a flashback and not providing us new information and new context as to what happened at the time. So, whilst I think it's unlikely because we know Jurassic Park had a very limited staff, maybe there was someone else there. Maybe there's someone else working there, and this somehow relates to Dodgson. Maybe it's just a nice atmospheric opening, showing all the embryos and Dennis Nedry's failure, and then introducing Dodgson and whatever his role is going to be in Dominion. I imagine he's probably higher up now, even more so at Biosyn, and Biosyn are producing their own dinosaurs. We know that genetic power is out there and everybody's capable of doing their own thing. So anyways, maybe it relates to Dodgson in some way. There we go, highlight that. That's idea number 1. Theory number 2 is the more simpler of the lot, is that it's simply showcasing some dinosaur embryos for some reason. Now, what that would be, I don't know. as a slightly controversial suggestion, I think one idea is possibly that this is showcasing the survival of the Spinosaurus. So the Spinosaurus got destroyed on Isla Sorna. We know the Spinosaurus was actually made, oddly enough, by Masrani on Isla Sorna, according to the DBG anyway. Well, the Spinosaurus was eventually killed, obviously, when the island got destroyed in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. But if they wanted to bring the Spinosaurus back for one final show in the third film, in the what we think is going to be the final film in this era of Jurassic Park, there's more films planned, but I imagine it'll be kind of like a new storyline, basically. They'd have to show how that's going to happen, right? Because we know the Spinosaurus didn't survive, so maybe what they do is we go back to 1993, or even a little bit later, I don't know, whenever, and we see them shipping Spinosaurus DNA away from Isla Sorna before everything kicks off. And that way maybe there is a reason for the Spinosaurus to still exist down the line. It could be anything else. Honestly, the flashback could mean barely nothing. It could be pretty meaningless. Maybe it's just showing the raptors. Maybe it's a way to tie in with Blue, for example, showing the basis of her DNA when the raptor DNA first gets shipped over, and then the evolution over the years until Blue eventually popped out. And, you know, that's a way for us to connect with Blue throughout the franchise history, something like that. I don't know what other dinosaurs would make sense to be focused on in this manner. You know, why would they be important enough to be shipped from Site B to Site A? Alternatively, new theory, I've just realised this, maybe this is being shipped. Oh, we just came up with it, I don't know why. Maybe this isn't an arrival from Site B, maybe this is a delivery to Site B. You know, that's the destination there, and they're putting all the embryos they have in Site A over to Site B in order to build whatever it is. You know, we know this, again, the Spinosaurus was built on Site B, and there are suggestions it was a genetic mutant and a hybrid of some description, so maybe they're sending DNA over for that purpose. I don't know, feel free to speculate. The third theory, and maybe the least popular, but probably my favourite, in that I think it's most likely, is that this is actually tied to Maisie somehow. I've got a few reasons to think in that. There's Maisie. She's not having the best day. So there's a few reasons to believe that. First of all, we know Maisie is back. Maisie's a returning character in Jurassic World Dominion. So there's number one. Number two, Maisie is a hybrid. Essentially, Maisie is a clone. She's formed from the DNA of her mother, I believe, directly from her mother. And that's why she looks so much like her and it's very similar to her and all this kind of jazz. I don't know the date of the mother's death, but I will say, according to the wiki, at the very least, the mother actually visited Jurassic Park at some point in the past. And you'd have to assume, given the limited amount of time Jurassic Park really existed, you know, they were working on the park for a long time, but then it all went to hell pretty quickly. So the mother would have had to be there before the arrival of Grant and Ellie and Malcolm. And probably towards the end, while the park is, you know, still looking relatively set up. So maybe we're going to see Maisie's mother and her visit to Jurassic Park, her interaction with the embryos and the idea of cloning and all this kind of jazz. Maybe we're going to see Lockwood in his youth in the Jurassic Park lab. This is one of the tricky things. Because we're doing a flashback here, you can't include any of the modern characters. Dodgson can't be there, Grant, Sattler, blah, blah, blah. None of them can be there. Wu can't even be there. It has to be a new character. Or... no, it can't be. Like, you can't do... I don't think you'd get away with, like, a young Alan Grant, because he just won't look like Alan Grant. And plus, we've seen those characters in this film already, so it doesn't make sense. So really, it has to be a new character. Or at least one that was never visible in the original Jurassic Park. So Lockwood could very much appear, and I think he's a pretty good shout. Lockwood, of course, died in the last film, but we know he must have had some interaction with Jurassic Park. His daughter went to Jurassic Park. So maybe he and his daughter were visiting Jurassic Park, you know, we're seeing the embryos getting shipped, and that's the kind of the seed of an idea in his head that when his daughter does eventually die, to clone her, basically. His granddaughter. Yeah, they claim that Maisie's his granddaughter, but technically she's not, right? That's how it goes. I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I've seen Fallen Kingdom. I suspect Maisie's going to have a prolific role in the third film. She's the first child to have... Every other child has disappeared after one film, basically. Maisie's actually going to make a reappearance. So she must be pretty important, and I think her cloningness, her human cloneness, her links with Lockwood, her links now with Chris Pratt, what's his name? Owen and Claire, makes her quite important to the franchise. So maybe we're going to get some origins as to why Maisie exists and where that idea came from, and, you know, Lockwood's desperation in the aftermath of the death of his daughter and what led him to create Maisie in the first place. That's actually my bet. That doesn't necessarily explain what's in here. It could just be any random dinosaur for that theory. It really could. This is a beautiful looking page, by the way. It could be any random dinosaur. But it could be the spark that then eventually, you know, when you get an idea and it doesn't... Well, it's not an idea. It's not thinking, I'm going to clone my dead daughter, because his daughter's not dead at that point. But, you know, you see this thing and then something happens later on and your mind kind of jumps back to the past and then makes that spark and makes that connection. That is up there in my list of ideas. But there are many possibilities, folks. But what is in the crate? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Did we miss anything? Is there anything else on this image that would signify what could possibly be inside the crate? Let me know what you guys think. I'll see you lovely folks next time. Stick around for much more Jurassic World Dominion news as soon as we get it. Cheers, much love as always. Bye-bye.